South Korean President Moon Jae-in's first bilateral summit with his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump has just come to a close. That at the White House. Now, as we wrap up and review the bilateral summit between President Moon Jae-in and U.S. President Donald Trump, we take a look at the observation points that could indicate whether it was a success or a failure. Did the two leaders get along? Was there chemistry or was there hostility? We'll be discussing this back in the Seoul studio with Sumi Terry and Dr. Chang-su on Peninsula 24 this week.
Mr. President, I'm thrilled that you are here today and deeply honored that you choose to go to the United States as your first foreign trip as president. I greatly enjoyed our dinner last night and the many productive discussions that we've already started having today.
이번 방미를 통해 트럼프 대통령과 저 사이에는 깊은 신뢰와 우위가 형성되었습니다. 이는 우리 앞에 놓여 있는 많은 과제들을 해결해 나가는 데 있어서 든든한 기반이 될 것이라고 확신합니다.
And joining me in the studio is, to my left, Dr. Sumi Terry. She's a director at the Bauer Group Asia and a former CIA analyst. Sumi, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me on.
And of course, to my right, as always, Dr. Chang-su.
Good to see you again, both of you.
Yes, this week. Now, so the South Korea-U.S. summit, that's where I was going to start off, but just North Korea has just recently, again, launched a missile. Now, what does that mean? It's the first one right after the South Korea-U.S. summit. What does that mean? Is North Korea trying to send a message?
Well, this was entirely expected from us because it's 4th of July in the United States and they love to give us as a gift. So we expect
extra firework.
Yeah, extra firework. And I think it's coming right after the summit. This was all of their plan. They were going to do it anyway. They are going to continue with their missile and nuclear tests. So I'm not surprised.
Me neither. Because they're trying to raise the ante again because we have a new government in Seoul. They proposing kind of dialogue and negotiation with North Korea. But they say, we are not that easy guy. We are a very tough guy. We're going to do whatever we want under the order of the great supreme leader. So this is exactly what they did. So I was not that much surprised because this isn't just another series of missile tests.
So I guess it gives room for the Moon Jae-in administration to pursue, I suppose, hardline stands and pressure and sanctions. And now we have, because they have a legitimate reason to go that route. And I guess that's in line with U.S. policy. Am I correct?
Yes, absolutely. U.S. is all about putting maximum pressure. I don't think we're ready for dialogue. Even rhetorically, even though rhetorically we say we're ready to engage with them, I think right now it's about putting maximum pressure on North Korea through sanctions. U.S. just recently, just a couple of days ago, decided to go pursue secondary sanctions against Chinese banks and entities that do illicit business with North Korea. So I think this is in line with the Trump policy, and this is kind of a blow to the Moon administration.
I agree with Dr. Terry because this is a part, because the United States has been talking about the maximum pressure and engagement, and there is a condition between the two. Now the United States made it very clear they're not talking about the engagement anymore, given this kind of recent nuclear test by North Korea. And another one this morning, that is they're going to delay the second part of their strike to North Korea as much as possible because they are facing a real more immediate threat from North Korea.
Yeah. So I wonder, is this another sign or is this another message from North Korea that South Korea, no matter what you say, no matter what you try to do, you're not of our concern?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, the North Koreans also told me, and I was surprised by this, not really quite surprised, but I thought, wow, this is an interesting comment. They repeatedly said, South Koreans are not our counterparts. We don't need to negotiate with you. We don't need to deal with you. Our counterpart is our Americans. The U.S. is a counterpart. South Koreans can do whatever you want. And you can, if you want to give things, sure, fine, whatever. But there's no indication that they wanted to deal with South Koreans in terms of negotiations or dialogue.
because they believe all the past, actually the starting of the Korean War started between the United States and North Korea and Russia and China later on. So I think there's a part of their assumption and perception that the Korean War has not ended yet, and they have a long way to go to resolve this kind of standoff situation or the arms agreement situation with a new peace treaty. So this is all their rhetoric. They are not dealing with South Korea per se because we are not part of that treaty, according to their theory. But the reality is totally different because they are facing South Korea as a reality. We are the one who maybe help them out of this kind of chaos, and we are actually the neighbors to live with for long. So this is just a rhetoric. So my point is, don't pay too much attention to any short statement. This is their rhetoric, and they actually want the South Korea to be in a driver's seat rather than in the back seat.
So going back to the summit, so does this mean that the South Korea-U.S. summit this time around between the new leaders, President Moon Jae-in and President Trump, in terms of North Korea policy, wasn't too much of a success? What does that mean? How can we interpret this?
Well, it was success in the sense that the Moon administration and President Moon said the right things, that we're going to closely coordinate with the United States, that they tried to show that there's no real difference or divergent approach when it comes to North Korea. But the problem is, there will be a divergent approach if President Moon is going to try to continue to seek dialogue while the Trump administration is pursuing sanctions and hard pressure against North Korea.
This kind of conflict may actually lead us to a much better solution. Because it is very important that when we have some problem, different approach to resolving North Korean issues, we have to talk to each other. And you find we are a little bit different from each other in terms of how we're going to deal with North Korean problem, which is quite natural because given our different national interests, given for example, like a China-U.S. relationship, and given our North-South Korean relationship, it is quite natural. But I think this summit was a kind of success, given the relatively short period of time for preparations and all kinds of anxieties, worried, voiced by Washington and Seoul about some particular issues like THAAD and our approach to North Korea. But I think this is given this kind of ground framework that we're going to continue to deal with these problems based on a very robust, strong alliance. That's a good starter, I think.
Well, I think in some sense, these kind of provocations by North Korea helps because it's hard for the Moon Jae-in administration to pursue dialogue. So in that way, there's more aligned approach between Washington and Seoul.
So my question is why North Korea is doing a very silly sounding strategy again, firing another missile. When we all expect this will be a minus for North Koreans, why are they doing this?
Right, they're giving more legitimacy for the South Korean government to go ahead with the THAAD deployment and work in unison with the United States in terms of putting more pressure on North Korea.
Right.
So this is what they say, part of very highly calculation by the supreme leader. Okay.
So which is perhaps the reason why the security and the foreign policy, North Korea policies, weren't too much of a problem when the two leaders discussed those matters. In fact, it was more of trade and economic relations that were the grilling point. Did we expect this going in?
Well, to some degree, because 2 weeks before the South Korean presidential election, remember when President Trump called the Chorus FTA free trade deal a horrible deal for the Americans. And even after President Moon got sworn in that first congratulatory call, President Trump again mentioned renegotiating free trade deals. So this was expected. I didn't expect the kind of pressure. It's like you can bring it up, but this was, the way he brought it up, such focus on the trade deal, saying this is really bad for America. So I think that was unnecessary to push it that hard, to play such hardball with a close ally in the region, our closest ally in the world, really.
So for Mr. Trump, bring that trade issue again is a kind of plus for him. This is a kind of a gain for him. But I would call it this summit is not just a zero-sum game. It's a non-zero-sum game. It's a win-win situation we finally ended with. Because for President Moon, we say we basically agree on the necessity and the strong alliance with the United States on which we can build in our all kind of solutions for including North Korea's and other issues. But for the United States, for Mr. Trump, it is the trade issue is a big important one. They have a perception the United States is declining relative, particularly to China, and they have still running a huge trade deficit with so many countries, China and South Korea as well, and Germany as well. So this issue is a very domestic issue for Mr. Trump, and also this has a tremendous implication for South Korea. So we just started with these kind of two important issues, security issues and trade issues on the table. And the problem is, after all these, the next meetings, summit meetings, and also 2+2 meetings, they're going to deal with how we are going to define, how we're going to find a solution to all these very complicated issues.
I would ask the Koreans to not take it personally because, as you just mentioned, this has been a central campaign promise for President Trump. I mean, he pulled the U.S. out of Paris Climate Accord, remember?
Right.
And just because he thought those environmental laws are unfair to American businesses. I mean, he's picking fight with Canada and Mexico over trade, and these are our allies. So I would say this is such a central domestic issue for Mr. Trump. I wouldn't take it personally as an alliance issue necessarily.
I agree with Dr. Terry.
So another big obstacle that may stand in the way in terms of not only South Korea-U.S. relations, but this Asia-Pacific region as a whole, defense budget. That was another sticky point that South Korea's the presidential team heading to Washington tried their very best to avoid it being discussed at the head table. But President Trump did bring it up, defense budget. What do we do about this?
Well, you're right. I mean, these are the two issues that's important to Mr. Trump, burden sharing and free trade deal. Well, this is going to be another source of problem because the perspective, his perspective is that South Korea is not paying enough, although they are paying a lot, particularly when it comes to per capita GDP. South Korea is paying, and if you remember, they keep comparing it to Japan, and Japan I think pays about $2 billion a year, much more than South Korea. But we have more U.S. forces in Japan. There are reasons for that, but I do think this is going to be potentially a problem down the road because I don't think there's going to be any kind of break coming from Washington. He's going to President Trump is going to pursue these two issues: trade and burden sharing.
And burden sharing is another very important issue for Mr. Trump, but he also acknowledged that we are buying a lot of military equipment from the United States, Martin Lockheed's F-35 and other military equipment, which is huge. We are the biggest buyer of arms sales from the United States. And we also paid a lot of money for the relocation of U.S. bases into Pyeongtaek.
Sure.
So actually, I don't worry about kind of new round of talks, for example, because we have to put new variables into this kind of calculation. So if we owe too much to the United States, we have to pay more. And if that's not the case, we should get more. So we are in a very new situation that we are going to have a much better and justified deal. Don't worry too much about it. Like a deal is a deal, and we will come up with all kind of justification why we have this kind of contributions and why comparing us with Japan is not a good idea because we have a totally different system of calculating these kind of payments. So the United States is becoming much more understandable why we are bringing up this issue again when it comes to burden sharing with the United States.
Well, so let's connect with Director Alan D Romberg from the Stimson Center in the U.S. Hello there. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure to be with you this morning.
So how do you evaluate the first ever summit between President Donald Trump and South Korean President Moon Jae-in this time around?
I think that it was a successful summit. I don't think it resolved all issues. It was never designed to do that. But it does seem to me as though they established a pretty good personal relationship, which is very important. And it seems to me that the way they addressed some of the more difficult issues suggests that even though they didn't resolve them, of course, they are moving in a direction where they will cooperate and find a way forward that will serve the interests of both Korea and the United States.
So we did see the adoption of a South Korea-U.S. a joint statement following the bilateral one-on-one between the two leaders. What was the biggest accomplishment, would you say, when we look at that statement adopted by the two leaders?
So for now, I think that President Moon has a very positive approach. to both the alliance relationship and I would also say his approach to finding a constructive outcome, a way of resolving the trade and other economic issues is also very helpful. And it seemed to me that President Trump, though he has a habit of stating warnings when he goes into talks, nonetheless is open to finding solutions that work for everybody.
All right, Director Alan D Romberg, a distinguished fellow at the Stimson Center, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're more than welcome. Thank you very much.
Having seen many summits of these kinds, both from the Republican administration and Democrat administration, how would you evaluate this summit in terms of personal chemistry?
I do think President Moon worked very hard to put his best foot forward and to create some sort of rapport, build some sort of rapport with President Trump. So I think in that regard, he succeeded. Maybe it's not the closest ever, but as a first meeting, there was no disaster. President Trump and President Moon seem to have gotten along quite well. So in terms of building chemistry, I think that we could call it a success.
And a lot of us were quite concerned and nervous, right, Dr. Kim, about, what will President Trump do spontaneously to President Moon, and how is President Moon going to react to that? So there was all that talk about, are we prepping for a handshake, different scenarios, how is he going to respond? President Trump really didn't pull anything. He was quite polite, actually.
Yes, no, and I don't think there was an extended handshake or even with Angela Merkel, there was always something with every leader, but this time it went fairly smoothly. There was no hiccup between them. So I think
Why do you think President Trump decided to take that route? Does he just like the man, or?
Well, he could have liked him, or he's now, more seasoned. This is now not his first meeting, and he realizes that every time there was some sort of media follow-up, so he needs to be a little bit more careful on this. And he could have liked President Moon as well. So, but anyway, I think it was good. It was successful in that they did build some sort of a working relationship, and I think that's good.
I guess one of the reasons why Mr. Trump began to have a better understanding, have good chemistry with Mr. Moon was the first thing Mr. Moon did when he arrived in Washington, D.C. His visit to the Changjin Reservoir Memorial, Campaign Memorial, and also Korean War Veterans Memorial. This is not just a symbolic. This is his personal story of Moon Jae-in. And Mr. Moon Jae-in is actually a small microcosm of what happened for the last 70 years under our alliance, because he was born during the Korean War time, and he was held by the United States USS merchant ship Meredith Victory, and he was their parents, one of the 14,000 rescued.
Right.
So this is a personal type, but this is really symbolic of how close our two allies have been for the last 70 years, and how long we are going to go for putting an end to this long forgotten war to ends up as a kind of peaceful war and with a new treaty with the United States.
Those two visits went down really well because it was very positively portrayed by the media, and President Moon gave very moving speech, and I saw that. And that, I think, did have very positive impact in terms of cementing perception among the American people and American policymakers that President Moon is, by telling his personal story, that he does value and appreciate the alliance, that he has faith in the alliance. So
on the other hand, I'd like to really congratulate and thank all the people, the staff people, and also the people at this research institution like CSIS who helped them with these kind of tremendous important tips, which are so important to average Americans because when they talk about Korea, they don't know whether it's a North Korea and South Korea, but they all remember, not many of them, but still there are many Americans who remember the Korean War. So this is a good start, a good connecting point, how they can get each other, because it is a personal story of President Moon. And Mr. Moon is in his 70s. He has a memory of the Korean War and why our alliance is so important to each other now and for many years to come.
I guess at this point, with another missile test by North Korea, things are a little more difficult. I suppose, difficult on President Moon's agenda, but do you think President Moon will be able to earn support from the U.S. and President Trump when it comes to his plan on pursuing economic cooperation, resuming the Kaesong industrial complex, and the likes?
Honestly, Kaesong industrial complex is not something that Mr. Trump is going to support because the Washington policymakers right now, the focus on North Korea policy is maximum pressure through sanctions. They're even pursuing secondary sanctions against Chinese banks and entities. This is something that's very hard for Americans to do because it strains relationship with China further. Yet we're doing that because we want to put maximum pressure. By opening Kaesong industrial complex, Americans are thinking this is in violation of United Nations Security Council resolutions against the sanctions policy. So I don't think on this aspect, in terms of Kaesong and opening Kumgang, I don't think American policymakers and Mr. Trump is not going to support that. So this is a source of contention if President Moon is going to pursue this course.
I agree, Dr. Terry. Even in South Korea, there are populations who actually support the resumption of Kaesong industrial complex, for example. There are things of the past, because given this all kind of nuclear missile test from North Korea, they have now having a different thought about this kind of reopening of the industrial complex and the resumption of the Kumgang tour, because facing this kind of renewed threats from North Korea, particularly the people who are SME, small, medium industries in South Korea, they actually support the resumption of these industrial complex and the tourism at Kumgang Mountain. But with these kind of new provocations, I would say, from North Korea, they might think otherwise, and they might look for some other alternatives, not just these two, all the past things, but we have to look for some other compromise that is, okay, temporary suspension is okay of these. So we have to find a better solution than these two.
The problem with the Kaesong industrial complex is that we cannot ensure that the money, the wages that are earned, does not go to fund North Korea's nuclear program. That's why Americans think this is...
And this point has been very well taken even by the SMEs and the small, medium industry people
In fact,
that I've met.
we know for sure that a certain portion of that goes to the leadership, and that would eventually end up being used for the development of its WMDs.
Which is very true. Yeah, very true.
Right.
Yeah.
So wrapping up this conversation, I'd like to ask you, Sue, for your evaluation. So if you were to give a grade on the President Trump, President Moon summit meeting, so it was their very first intro meeting. If you were to give a grade, what would it be?
Well, you have to give two different grades because Mr. Moon, I think, did as well as he could have possibly. There's no, he hit all the points that he needed to do to try to build a rapport with Mr. Trump, and by giving these very moving speeches and really solidifying in people's mind that he values alliance relationships. So I say I'll give Mr. Moon A. I have to give Mr. Trump B-, only because I think while trade issues are important, I understand that, but the way he pressed Mr. Moon, and South Korea is such an important ally for the United States, one of the two important allies in the region, and and one of the closest allies in the world. And you don't treat your ally like this by really just pressing too hard on trade. That can come later. So I think Mr. Trump could have done better.
In my opinion, I don't like to grade these two summits because they did their best from their own. They had their own share of agonies and the problems. So I think compared to these two, Mr. Moon did much better than Mr. Trump, as we expect. But given that short period of preparations, but also he was probably the first visit, maybe second visit to the United States under very uncomfortable situation. I think he did best, and he succeeded in persuading South Koreans that don't worry too much about our alliance. And I think in that sense, if I were first to give a grade, I would give an A.
I know Dr. Kim is very generous. A coming from Dr. Terry. I know it's very, very difficult.
She's a tough grader, right?
Yes, she is, and I know it personally. So that was a good meeting. Now, moving forward for the G20, if you have a little advice or a tip for Mr. Moon heading into this multilateral diplomacy stage.
Well, I think as he prepared very hard for the summit with Mr. Trump, I think same approach will be needed. I think it's the first meeting that he's going to have with all the foreign leaders. So I think just trying to understand each leader and trying to build a relationship for the first meeting so you can have a foundation for a successful relationship going forward. I think he's, if you just look at how he conducted himself in the summit with Mr. Trump, I'm expecting that he's going to have pretty good meetings with the rest of the foreign leaders.
one tip I'd like to give him is, okay, the Korean War is, even though we don't like it, we don't like to remember it for long, but anyway, it is a reality. It is a part of a past history. Because China, Russia, United States, and Japan, even Japan, we are all related in one comment. That was the past history of the Korean War. So which was something we should, come out of this, how we are going to mend this tremendous difficulties caused by this kind of problem, and how end up with the final destination, final scenario. So that may be a good starting point, a good scenario, even for Mr. Xi and Mr. Putin in their meetings in Hamburg.
Right, so basically, Mr. Moon did pretty good, very good, in terms of his first intro meeting with President of the United States, and not only that, his debut on international stage. And I think this was a very good discussion. And next week, when we meet after the G20 meeting, I think we'll have more to discuss and more to, I suppose, contrast your opinions on. We'll see you next week. Thank you, Dr. Kim.
Thank you
and
again.
I hope to see you again.
Yes, thank you for having me on.
Yes.
This was fun.
Yes, this was fun. And I'd like to thank all of you for staying with us. We will be back next week with more from the G20 summit. Thanks.